This is WCN, the Whole Care Network. You talk, we listen. Content presented on the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent views of the Whole Care Network. Always consult your physician for medical and fitness advice, and always consult your attorney for legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Have you ever met anybody that has caregiving on their bucket list of things to do in life?
Beyond caregiving, how do we care?
We also have to care for ourselves.
How do we treat friends, family, strangers we meet?
Forget it.
How do we heal? The physical, social, financial, spiritual.
Hello.
By creating healing ties. Tying it all together like a bow tie. With your host, Christopher McClellan, the bow tie guy.
Well, greetings, everyone. It is Christopher McClellan, the bow tie guy, and welcome to another episode of Healing Ties featured on the Whole Care Network. And on the Whole Care Network, we are all about story sharing and resources, because we believe it's through story sharing where diversity meets the road to collaborate on a common cause. And our common cause is supporting caregivers before, during, and after caregiving ends. And as you know, we're celebrating National Family Caregivers Month with the reboot of the popular Healing Ties podcast. Well, I think it's popular, but with our 30 and 30 podcast to celebrate National Family Caregivers Month, and the soft launch of our new Whole Care Network website. So when you get a chance, please visit our new website at wholecarenetwork.com, where you'll get the opportunity to meet Bo. And when you see Bo, you'll get it 100%, because Bo ties things together on the Whole Care Network. And during our soft launch, we'll be asking our listeners to provide us with feedback on the new site so we can continue to build our site where you can easily find your favorite podcasts, favorite blogs, and videos. Oh, and by the way, you'll be able to search content on the Whole Care Network via our 4 pillars of care: our physical, social, financial, and spiritual health. And be on the lookout for our new YouTube channel featuring live shows, our streaming 24/7 radio station, and a few other exciting changes coming to the Whole Care Network in 2021. I am looking forward to receiving your feedback on the new website at wecare@wholecarenetwork.com. Well, enough from me. My guest for this episode of Healing Ties is the founder and CEO of Keeping Us Safe, Matt Gurwell. Matt retired from a very distinguished and successful 24-year career as an assistant district commander with the Ohio State Highway Patrol. From his experience as a state trooper, Matt recognized the need to help seniors and families bring a peaceful resolve to a sensitive and uncomfortable issue: when to retire from driving. Now, Matt is on a mission to provide strategies and guidance to seniors that will help them continue driving safely until the decision is made to retire from their driving career. And Matt, it is great to have you on Healing Ties.
Thank you very much for having me, Chris.
You've been just a big supporter of the network, and I'm a big fan of yours, and always look forward to having a chat with you. And while I know a lot about your background and keeping us safe, why don't you tell our listeners
Sure.
from your perspective?
I'd love to, Chris. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this podcast episode. But also in the bigger picture, being part of the whole care network has been very rewarding for me, and I'm really grateful for that. So as you mentioned just a moment ago, I retired from the Ohio State Highway Patrol, and I saw throughout my career that there was a void in the system, so to speak, on how we as a society address the issue of older drivers with diminished driving skills. So I'm not just talking about older drivers in general. Many of them are very, very good drivers. But some of them probably shouldn't be driving any longer because of the natural aging process and the toll it takes on our bodies and or our minds over the years. So when I retired, Chris, I wanted to try to fill that void for families so that they would have someone they can turn to that can help mom or dad transition into a driving retirement, or like I like to say, transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat without unnecessary erosion to their dignity. As you mentioned, the very name of our program is Beyond Driving with Dignity, and we place in all of our programming, we place a huge amount of emphasis in helping the older driver that's maybe going to retire from driving do so and still maintain their pride, their dignity, and of course their independence. That's the purpose part of starting Keeping Us Safe. The passion part stems from me as a state trooper having to deliver many, many death notifications over the years related to tragic automobile crashes. And I call it the long journey back to my patrol car, where I leave the family's residence and walk back out the front door and make that, I can't put it any other way, long trek back to my patrol car, feeling horrible about what took place and about the conversation we just had. And I always thought that someday I'd like to be in a position to do something that's more positive and proactive to keep these accidents from happening in the first place. So much of law enforcement, Chris, as I'm sure you can appreciate, is reactive. You see someone run a stop sign, and then you take action and you stop and suggest that they not do that anymore. You see someone rob a bank, and I like to say you stop and ask them not to do that anymore for the next 18 to 24 years. But so much of it is reactive. So I wanted to develop a proactive program, again, to keep these tragedies from happening in the first place and to provide concerned families with an avenue that they could take to help make that happen. So hence the founding of Keeping Us Safe.
And it's such a not only terrific program, but such a needed program, because it is hard to kind of sit back and say to give up your driving, because our independence is so connected with driving. But finding that way to have that practical, honest, and upfront conversation is something that you and Keeping Us Safe really excels at.
Well, thank you. And, it's meant to be a service that can sort of, for the family, they can sort of outsource this dreaded driving conversation, have an independent third party come in, what can be more fair to the older driver, and help him or her make the right decisions about their driving future. But it kind of removes the family from that immediate line of fire and puts a little distance between them and their loved one.
I think that's one of the very specialties of the program, is that, in a sense, and I say this very kindly, we could be the kind of the bad person in this and help articulate really just a very honest conversation between the senior driver and the family.
Absolutely. And we've had tremendous success with the program. Of course, it's been in existence for about 8 years, and we've spent every single day of those 8 years trying to improve the program. And the more of these 3-hour sessions we're able to do with the family and with the older driver, his or herself, the more we're able to tweak the program and to get the desired outcome, I call it. And the desired outcome is, if the older driver shouldn't be driving, then if they don't say that out loud themselves near the end of the session, at least they're receptive to what I or one of our folks has to offer them.
Very much so. Well, that brings me to my next question for you. Can you kind of walk our listeners through what the self-assessment would be like for a senior driver?
I'd love to, Chris. I could talk for days about that. It's a 3-hour session. Typically, our requests for service either come from family members or now from the medical community. Just over half of our referrals actually come to us from doctors, physicians across the country. But anyhow, it's a 3-hour session that takes place in the older driver's home. So we come to them. Takes place, I like to say, at their kitchen table, the one place in the world they're the most comfortable. And it's just him and I, just the older driver and myself, or again, one of our representatives. And we go through this 3-hour self-assessment program. And I say self-assessment because this is in no way a clinical driving assessment. It's not what you're going to get at the hospital. And that program is completely different, Chris, than what we do. We bring a basket of tools to the older driver into their home and facilitate their working through these exercises. We conduct a lengthy learning conversation with the person, which is in some terms similar to an interview, you might call it. But this is much deeper than that, because the whole success of our session, Chris, is based on my ability to earn and develop a positive rapport with this person.
Right.
And get them to trust me, so that at the end, if it is necessary to tell the person it's probably time for you to retire from driving, again, they're a lot more receptive to that. So we go through the learning conversation. We go through several tabletop pen and paper type cognitive related exercises. Mm-hmm. And then, assuming it's safe to do so, we go out and go for a ride together. We drive typically to 3 different locations. And those locations, Chris, are places that the individual is already comfortable driving to. Earlier during the learning conversation, they would have been asked, tell me the 3, 4, 5 places you drive to most often. And you'll hear things like the grocery store, to church, to the drugstore, to my friend's house, and those types of things. So that's where that becomes our driving route. Because the whole session, again, is set up to err in their favor, to give them every possible benefit of the doubt. And it all goes back to that part about wanting to build a rapport with them and get them to trust you. So there's no trickery whatsoever. They're given every benefit of the doubt as we move through the session.
And building rapport is so important.
Absolutely. It's everything to our program. And then at the last half hour of this 3-hour session, then we invite any family to come back, and we all sit at the same kitchen table and talk very openly. I explain to the myself and the older driver will together explain to the family members what we did during the session, and I'll show them examples of how this person did on the exercises that we did. We'll talk about the person's memory, and then right then and there, before I leave, we'll offer recommendations on their driving future, and that can be anything from, Mr. Smith, I think you're doing an outstanding job. Call us if anything changes in the future. To the other extreme, that Mr. Smith, I think you should discontinue driving effective immediately. And here's why I say that. So we have that conversation right there before we leave the house. And then within 10 days, Chris, the family receives a very detailed report on documenting exactly what took place, what the recommendations are about this person's driving future, and of course, examples of how we arrived at those recommendations. And the family can use that then and share it with the physician and other family members and whomever else they deem appropriate.
Very useful tool. And I would have to think that in this self-assessment, there's some things that are really self-revealing for the older driver.
Absolutely. I've done over 400 of these sessions myself. And I've had some of these folks just start physically crying because they're upset. They know they should be able to do this particular exercise, but they just can't make it happen. They can't remember. I've had, Chris, individuals not remember how many children they have, sadly. I met with a retired Ohio State trooper, and they thought maybe I would be able to get through to this person because of that connection. And that person shouldn't have been driving any longer. But he didn't even remember, Chris, what his career was.
Goodness.
Yeah, sometimes it's very disheartening, and it's very, I hate to use the word sad, but sometimes it is. But also, let me add this. Through doing these 400 of these sessions, I've learned one thing, that these are the absolute best people in the world. They're as Tom Brokaw said, they're typically from our greatest generation.
Yeah.
World War II and now Vietnam veteran era people that typically come through the program. And they've always been providers for themselves and for their families. They've been very responsible people. Typically, they're very well educated, and They've just done an outstanding job of living their life and doing things the right way. But now we all reach, NHTSA says, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says, on average, we outlive our safe driving years by 7 to 10 years. So that being
Wow.
true, any one of us can expect the day to come where because we're living longer, it's simply not safe to continue driving. And that is a very difficult conversation to have with these folks. But doing it with tact and empathy and compassion sure makes it go a lot better for them.
It's interesting. I say to myself, especially living in Florida, so I look forward to the day when I don't have to drive. But getting to that day and making that decision is a lot different than kind of fantasizing about not driving.
Sure, it's some ways off, so it's kind of easy to say.
It's easy to say that,
yeah.
But it's so important to be aware of it.
And another thing I've run into, Chris, along those exact same lines is we all say that. We all tell ourselves and our families, I'll know when it's time to give up driving. And when that day comes, I will give up driving. But because of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and some other impairments, a lot of times we lose that ability to recognize that it might be time to give up driving.
Very much so. So if I'm going to put myself in a position of a family member, and I'm calling you to talk about my parents or my loved one, how what would be 3 tips that you would provide to somebody like myself to kind of start this conversation off with my parent or my loved one?
Number one is to make sure that you're basing this conversation on facts. Chris, I get phone calls here at the Keeping Us Safe office that say, my mother shouldn't be driving anymore. She just turned 80. And of course, my next question is, tell me more. Why shouldn't she be driving? Well, I just told you she turned 80. So some folks have this preconceived notion that when an adult gets to a certain age, that means they shouldn't be driving any longer. And that is just absolutely not true. So that this whole conversation needs to be based on facts. Make sure that you have bona fide information, something tangible, something measurable that you can share with this person. They've probably been driving, Chris, 60, 70 years, and many times have never had an accident, have never received a traffic citation. And now all of a sudden their adult children are telling them, I don't think you should be driving any longer. So you need to have some facts to substantiate and support those comments. Another thing I encourage families to do is not to wait to have these conversations. Sometimes we think, well, the next time this happens, or the next time dad gets lost, the next time he bumps into the neighbor's mailbox, the next time, well, number one, the next time could obviously be very tragic.
Very tragic, sure.
Too late for any conversations. But here's what you're going to run into. I did a self-assessment with a gentleman in Tampa, Florida once, and what he and his wife would do was every Sunday, Chris, that was the only day they drove. They would leave home, drive to church, drive to their favorite restaurant, and then go back home till next Sunday, where they'd repeat the same route. Well, on this particular Sunday, they left home, went to church, went to their favorite restaurant. As he was parking, he got the brake and the gas pedal confused, accelerated up over the parking curb, up over the sidewalk, up through the front of the restaurant, and halfway through this crowded restaurant on a Sunday afternoon. 9 people went to the hospital. 2 of them they thought were not going to survive. So now, even though this was after the fact, the family wanted to be as proactive as they could. So they called, they had us come down, meet with this gentleman to go through the self-assessment session. Well, he was very agitated, and he brings me, we're halfway through this 3-hour session, and he's fed up with everything. He's mad about the accident. He's mad at himself. He's mad at his wife. He's mad at his shoes, which he claimed caused the whole thing. And he went on to say that he thinks the 9 people that went to the hospital weren't even hurt. They just want to see. Right. So anyhow, he walks me to his picture window and he says, look at the cars driving by. He said, how many of those people do you think have had more than one accident? I said, probably many. He says, and that's my point. Why are you not talking to them? They've had more accidents than me. I've been driving longer than them, probably. Why are you here picking, so to speak, on me? So that became his argument, that this is only my first accident ever after 70 or so years of driving. And that's the hurdle a family is going to have to overcome, and they won't be able to overcome it if they wait until there's some triggering event. The person is going to use that to his or her advantage. So those conversations need to start today. Even if your mother or father are still excellent drivers, and they may very well be, but now is the time, especially in that case, now is the time to grease the skids for the driving conversation, so that if the day comes where they shouldn't be driving, you're already comfortable talking to mom or talking to dad about someday retiring from driving.
And it's certainly important to let our listeners know that this is a nationwide program, and you have professionals all throughout the country.
22 states, yes.
22 states. And if somebody wanted to become a Beyond Driving with Dignity professional and be able to help with the self-assessments, how would somebody go about doing that?
Well, it's on. There's information on how to become certified in our program on the front page of our website, Chris, and that's at www.keepingussafe.org. And there's a tab, of course, that they can click on and learn more about the certification end of the program. We only have about 70 certified professionals across the country in these 22 states, as I mentioned. And part of my business plan is to be like Starbucks. I want to have one on every corner. So we've got a long ways to go. And
we want to help you at the Whole Care Network achieve your goal.
Well, thank you. And the reason behind that is not for business purposes, but it's to make this program available to every family in the country if they choose to use it.
Very much so. It's about availability and keeping us safe.
Sure. Exactly. Very well put.
So, Matt, I think this is a great time to take our break. But when I come back, as I'm doing with all my guests here on my reboot of Healing Ties 30 and 30 podcast, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to want to know one fun fact about you that we haven't talked about so far in this podcast that you'd like to share with me and our listeners. How does that sound?
Okay, how long do I have to think of my response?
Well, I'll leave that up. One fun fact. Okay. I have one I could share, but I don't know. But we'll be
the statute of limitations.
The statute of limitations. Very good. Okay, you are listening to Healing Ties on the Whole Care Network. We will be right back.
Tomorrow on Healing Ties 2.0.
I believe that trust is the currency of senior care. So currency being the thing that we are trading in, it's all about trust. If we don't have a real solid, strong, trusted relationship between family and staff, that's when family goes into our human nature, which is the negativity bias, and we begin to look for the negative things. Hi, I'm Catherine Wells, founder and CEO of Serenity Engage. Chris and I had a great time talking today about the caregiving journey and about Bikram Yoga. So join us in this episode to learn more.
Join us tomorrow and every day in November for 30 shows in 30 days. Healing Ties 2.0. Available at thewholecarenetwork.com/Healing Ties and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I am continuing my delightful conversation with my good friend, Matt Gurwell from Keeping Us Safe. And Matt, before the break, kind of put you on the spot. And we didn't take 15 or 20 minutes between the break, but it took a little time. So
it was easier than I thought.
It was easier. So let's hear this fun fact about Matt Gurwell.
Chris, I am a helicopter fanatic.
I did not know that about you.
I know you didn't.
I did not know that about
helicopters. I have for years and years and years. On my bucket list is to purchase, and you can buy them, a kit helicopter where it arrives in a cardboard box, basically, and you assemble it at your own pace. And that has always been a goal of mine to do that. Anytime I hear a helicopter, Chris, whirling past, I'm like a 6-year-old that has to run out and take a peek at it. But I've always had that fascination for helicopters. They're like combines. Everything on a helicopter has a moving piece. Every single thing on it moves, and they all have to work, in sync with each other, in conjunction with each other. And I'm just fascinated by it.
Well, that is a really good fun fact that I did not know about you.
Great.
Helicopter. Well, I might have to just send you one and see how it turns out.
I'd appreciate that, Chris.
Well, Christmas is right around the corner.
That's right. I'll give you my P.O. box number. Just have it shipped to there.
So, Matt, we've been friends for a long time, and I so admire the great work that you're doing, and happy to have you a part of the Whole Care Network. You're one of our executive advisors, and it's just so important for me to continue to support the great work that you're doing. But did we leave anything left unsaid that you'd like to?
I'd just like to reiterate, Chris, that I'm very grateful to be part of the Whole Care Network. It's been an honor for me. I love your mission, and that is, as you said in the introduction, to provide information that caregivers, whether they're professional or family, can take and use back in their workplace, back in their families, and to offer them maybe just a tiny bit of relief on anything that they happen to be struggling with.
It's all about story sharing, where diversity meets the road to combat a common cause, and we share in that common cause. And Matt, with the stories you share and the great work that you do at keeping us safe, you are certainly someone who's creating healing ties all around us. I can't thank you enough for joining me today, and your friendship, and full speed ahead.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, goodness, I just love doing these podcasts again. And, that does it for this episode of Healing Ties. I'm your host, Christopher McClellan. You might know me as the Bowtie Guy. I've created a life to love after caregiving ends by sharing stories, resources, and being with awesome people like Matt Gurwell. Healing Ties is produced in the posh studios of Odd Vox Productions in St. Louis, Missouri, and is part of the Whole Care Network. Check out the soft launch of our new Whole Care Network website, and be sure to meet Bo and subscribe to Healing Ties wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. We'll see you for another episode of Healing Ties tomorrow as we continue our 30 podcast in 30 days to celebrate National Family Caregivers Month. Thanks for listening. Take care. Bye for now.
Ciao.
This is WCN, the Whole Care Network. You talk, we listen.